Hi, my name's Andrew McLaren, and I want to talk to you about PBIS or positive behavior enforcement strategies and why this is bad for internal motivation. It will be a study that I'm sharing and talking about some other impacts. So, generally, this video will look at the study, talk about some of these pros and cons, summarizing from that, and the difference between internal and external motivation in this context and what you really can kind of do, knowing what we know about PBIS and these systems. This video is kind of intended for teachers like myself who have been in buildings that use this system. And you ask yourself, like, do I need to get the kids candy? Is this actually good for the students, what I'm doing? What does the science actually say on this? And what do I do about it? So this is the study that I'm going to be kind of pulling some information from. It's really interesting and there's a lot in it. So I'll have the link in the description of the video, but there's one chart that's a nice summary where they kind of talk about PBIS like systems, like these token economies or reward systems are they're going to have students be more compliant. Like great, awesome. So it kind of works, but it doesn't really have students build self responsibility or self motivation, and it can cause a lot of issues as well. So if you're doing too much of PBIS systems, students will rely too much on getting rewards from adults, and that can cause problems. So there's a really common couple strategies like 3 to 1, specifically calling this out. How this is a very common thing that sounds sensible, but it's like actually not that good for students. Um, and it's pushed by administrators across the board as like the end all be all, a deep truth of the universe or something. And it's not. Like these systems that people are pushing are oftentimes very problematic. And there's a good summary in the conclusion right here that talks about if you have a school that's kind of like low functioning, like there's just chaos, then PBIS can help lower that chaos in the classroom. It can help students comply pretty well, but it's not going to help them do much more beyond that. So if we want students doing more than just being like good citizens, we want them to be like creative and ultimately people pursuing really interesting careers and goals in their lives, we need to be moving away from these PBIS systems. So yeah, this study has a lot. I'm going to be summarizing a couple bits of it soon. So PBIS has some pros and a lot of cons. I've listed out some of the main ones that are important to me. Some of these are from the article, some of them I've kind of added myself. Um, of course, you're going to get students doing what you want. A lot of the time, if you're giving them candy, they'll do that, right? They want the dopamine or whatever. But it really hurts their self management. So like if students are getting candy for reading, then they're not going to want to read if they're not getting candy, right? So they kind of get addicted to that reward, and then it causes a lot of issues. Students don't like feeling manipulated, so there's kind of even if they're having like a nice back and forth with the teacher, they feel like the teacher is a manipulator, and that doesn't feel great for a lot of people and can cause a really strong response. We can also think about this costing a lot of money. Like we don't have special funding for these systems, so that comes from the general fund, meaning we have less money available for like labs and field trips and other meaningful learning experiences. And you can have learning experiences that are kind of fun, that feel kind of like a PBIS, where it's like, hey, we get to go to the wetlands or the forest or whatever, and that feels kind of cool and nice. Um, Often these rewards are really unhealthy things. It might be unhealthy snacks or just time on electronic devices when there's other things that we could be doing as opposed to just like playing games or listening to music, which oftentimes is not school appropriate. So there's all kinds of issues, right? Um, Another thing to consider is that teachers who don't do these systems get hit hard by behavior problems. So if the kids are not getting the reward, they won't do the desired behavior. And that means by default, they're viewing themselves as kind of like bad or lazy and needing a reward to do anything good, which is not necessarily what I want to tell students who they are. I don't think that students are inherently bad. I don't think students inherently don't want to learn. Um, so when I give this candy to them, I'm basically saying, you're not going to do this unless I give candy to you. Um, and that's not a great message to send to kids. So internal motivation is something that comes from the inside. So they're learning because they want to have more opportunities later on in life, or maybe they just want to become smarter. Maybe they like to understand things around them a little bit more. That was kind of myself. I am curious about like the chemistry in the world and physics of the world, and it's interesting to me to understand those things better. That is a large part of why I became a science major, right? So I had that internal motivation and it helped me get propelled forward. I wasn't doing it just to get candy or whatever. Um, but if we're relying on external rewards, this means that you are doing learning, which is now associated with like bad feelings or like it's hard or work or something like that for candy. So that's a good association, right? And so we're telling them that learning inherently is not a nice thing when we rely on these external rewards. Ideally, we start with some external rewards for younger students because they don't really have like these metacognitive processes to really have good internal motivation or reliable internal motivation. Um, so these systems are kind of necessary for getting students to be safe in a classroom, but if they're used consistently throughout all grade levels and you're not kind of weaning kids off of this and telling them why, then they're going to end up just having behavior problems later on in other grade levels, um, or over relying on these PBI systems that kind of have to ramp up in intensity. So big picture, this stuff is really, really problematic for students, especially for older students. And if you over rely on these systems, it will lead to behavior problems. Um, I want to emphasize this. It's not your fault that students are coming into your classroom overly reliant on external motivation. Administrators will tell you that it's your fault. They will tell you that your classroom is chaotic because you don't have control in there. The reality is that those students rely on a system that has control over them and they're not self-motivated. That's the core issue here. And so you got to push back against this as much as you can to a degree and still kind of work within the systems, but kind of wean the kids off of it and talk to them about this. They're especially if they're middle school or high school level, they understand what you're talking about. If you can talk to them about like, I want you to learn for the sake of learning, they might roll their eyes, but like it it does sink in a little bit. I've had conversations with students, and I've seen this also with like the equitable grading practices. We're trying to structure that so that they're not just like doing classwork to get a good grade. They're doing classwork so they can build skills, and then those skills are associated um, with like higher grades, right? So if they are able to do those skills, then they get a higher grade. So it's really all about the skill and not about are you doing work day to day. So these systems of doing these new grading systems, they're relying a lot more on these internal motivation um, paths for the students' brains, but they're also kind of running into external motivation of the old school systems. So both are necessary, but we want to balance it and kind of move more towards the internal, especially students who are older. Um, I just really want to emphasize that the 3-to-1 ratio is not good for students. It's good for having a controlled classroom and having students like feeling like I want to make the teacher happy. That does not necessarily mean that that's going to lead to a student who wants to learn more science or math later on in their own life, not just classrooms. So if you want students who are just naturally curious and are pursuing things on their own time outside of school, um, we want to move more towards like a neutral feedback system where we're just saying what accurately they did or did not do and not like, oh, this makes me happy, but just telling them kind of where they are at and what they need to do better academically. Thank you for McLearning with me. Before you go, please check out the following services that I offer with my business. So if you click the link in my videos, this goes to my website. I might be changing it from Podia because I'm no longer doing the interactive videos for sale. I might put those up for free. But most of my other services are linked here. So you can see that I've got like a Teachers Pay Teachers and a Wyzant. The Teachers Pay Teachers has a lot of my assessments that I have for like the NGSS, as well as lessons that I made when I was actually a teacher in the classroom. So I've got quite a few things like CERs and other things on there. If you want to get one-on-one live support from me, either like with science or like working on like teaching support lessons and that kind of stuff, you can sign up through Wyzant. I have a link to there where you can contact me there, and we can schedule hourly appointments. I've got a few other things on here like a Facebook page and our social media. And if you're interested in getting professional development with me for like a team of teachers, a whole page with information on that. So yeah, feel free to check that out. Thank you.